So our next speaker is Tim Volk from SUNY, State University of New York, travelled over, so the College of Environmental Science and Forestry, and he's going to speak to us about what he's doing in the States. I've known Tim for about 15 years, as well as being an amazing sounding board for Willow and all that intellect. You've also introduced me to all the American beer, which I know I'll never let you forget about too much, so I wanted what I've been doing, drinking UK and Irish beer all that time. You're way ahead, way ahead. Tim, thanks, man.
Great, thanks for the opportunity to come and participate in this. I appreciate very much the opportunity to share a few minutes. You may have heard the news, there's some change afoot in the United States. So I'm going to provide a high-level perspective on where we stand, or at least where we stand when I put these slides together. What happens starting January the 6th, things may change on this front, but I'll give you a perspective of where we're at and then just make some comments about sort of high-level lessons learned, and I think some important connections in terms of how working together we might advance things going forward in a more rapid fashion. So SAF is the big driver. So if I was to pick a product in the United States that the federal government has chosen that we need to drive forward, not necessarily to the exclusion of other things, but it is the particular focus of the federal government in the last 2 to 3 years, of sustainable aviation fuel. So everything from feedstocks through to how do you move it around and convert it into SAF and then get it into markets. Right? This is really the big driver in the biomass community at this point in time from the federal level and their priorities. So I'm going to talk about largely the feedstock end. I'm a feedstock person. That's what I've done most of my career, woody feedstock, mostly forests and willow. So I'll have a focus on that as we go forward. So the sun piece there is to remind you that as we talk about these feedstocks, right, and it was mentioned, Charlotte mentioned it, somebody else mentioned earlier, right, we're really talking about solar powered chemical factories, right? I really try and make this point to people in the States. There's such a big push on solar PV, and it's great. We need all the sources to address climate change. But plants are doing an amazing thing. They're using water, they're using carbon dioxide, which heavens we'd like to get out of the air, right? And they're chemical factories powered by the sun, right? They make these amazing chemicals, and we talk about markets going forward, right? There's huge potential at small scale and large scale, but that's what we've got here is solar-powered chemical factories, right? Making things for us. We've got to figure out how to make and use them effectively and in a way that's sustainable. Okay, so this is a little bit messy, but feedstocks, so where are the feedstocks coming from? Oh, sorry, the SAF goals, I didn't mention, they're on the slide. 3 billion gallons by 2035, 35 billion gallons by 2050. Where we are now? Well, if I was generous, I'd say we're making 300 million gallons a year in the United States. So just a tenfold increase in the next 6 years, no big challenge, right? Nothing. In the United States, things go big or go home in the United States. That's sort of the approach, right? And there's some problems when you're trying to scale systems when you take these large-scale only approaches. So here's the latest version of what we call the billion-ton report. There have been multiple versions of this. This just came out last year. This is a middle-of-the-road sort of scenario. There's multiple scenarios, but in the U.S., the middle-of-the-road scenario would tell you can make produce 1.2 billion dry tons of biomass a year. Okay, so there's the number down here at the bottom, right? This is at a $70 dry ton scenario, and it would require somewhere between 8 and 16 million hectares of energy crops to make the energy crop component. So what we have here is the different parts, and the energy crops fit in here. The future components, they fit in the agriculture sector. That's where they get lumped in the United States. So woody and herbaceous energy crops, that's about a third of the future biomass supply. So if we're going to get to these targets, or anywhere near these targets, we're not going to do it without these perennial energy crops, right? It's very clear. There's other places where this same sort of pattern shows up. Also, just a comment. So there's been lots of activity around this in the last couple of years. This late summer, right, this CASA Bio, catalyzing the bioenergy across different sectors, it was a year-long initiative from federal departments. They gathered up probably 50 people from across academia and industry to address 6 categories of issues that we need to advance and where the funding should be going forward, right? So this is one on resilient biomass supply chains that I participated in. These are now out. They gave us a totally unrealistic timeline to create these things. Like, here, can you do this in 6 weeks? It's like, oh, really? So that's like, but there's crunch up against where we were at with the election coming. This may all change going forward, but these are now out there in terms of a direction of how to build the bioeconomy in the United States. It's the same story in New York. We've got a Climate Act. We have legislation that requires a reduction of 40% greenhouse gases by 2030, 85% by 2050. So how do we get there? Here's the scenarios, right, that are laid out. Here's our greenhouse gas emissions now, where we're at, where we need to get to. The black dots represent where we need to get to. There's multiple scenarios, but I'll just pull one out and we'll look at it just briefly here to make this point again. If we're going to do this, we need bioenergy. All those scenarios, doesn't matter which one you look at, they all need bioenergy to reach that 85% reduction by 2050, right? It's just, it's a part of the system that needs to be there. Wastes, ag and forest residues, and energy crops. So, excuse me, in this scenario, right, energy crops are about 25% of the supply. So they're important. So this comes up over and over again in the United States. But the reality is, where we're at, particularly on woody crops that I work on, right, we are probably at a low from the last 20 years in terms of woody crops on the landscape, right? It's just been, things have changed and shifted, and largely markets have disappeared from people, or the price or value of the land where things are being grown has value, higher value growing something else. And so, you know, 10 years ago, we had somewhere between 15 and 20,000 hectares, largely of poplar, but of some other willow, right, growing on the landscape. And most of that has gone away because of changes in the pulp paper industry and water rights in the western New York, western United States, right? There's more value growing other things than there is growing biomass. So lots of talk about where we need to go. Limited amount of material on the landscape at the moment to work with. So one of the things, and it's been emphasized here already, so it's encouraging to see, right, it's the whole supply chain. So while I say I'm a feedstock person, there's no point in producing feedstocks if you don't have a way to harvest it and move it. So that's a big problem now in the United States, right? Logistics, trucking, right, when you look at the age of people in the trucking industry and who's doing that, right, where is the replacement coming to move this stuff around? Certainly a big challenge that we face. You've got to have that, you've got to have conversion facilities that can work with the feedstocks that you're growing, and you've got to have a market to send whatever material or products you're making into. If we don't raise this whole supply chain together, it doesn't work, right? If there are breaks in the chain, if the links don't work or there's a break in the link, the whole supply chain fails, right, from my perspective. We would be better off to raise this whole supply chain in incremental steps, right? In the US, we have in the past spent hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars building biorefineries that ultimately don't work because there's not a market or because there's not a feedstock to feed into them, right, along with price issues. But if you just focus on one piece, it's not going to work. So you've got to work across the supply chain, and that's really important. And it seems to be an emphasis here, and I think that's a real asset of the thinking here and the perspective, right, is that you can't just do one part of this, you got to do them together. Okay, so I was going to talk about lots of lessons learned, right, but you've got experts here in the room that are addressing many of these things. So I'm going to make a few other comments. Here's sort of high-level thoughts of things we need to think about in terms of, particularly from the feedstock perspective. Again, I'm a feedstock person, so I'm coming from that perspective. Some of these came up, so I was wonderful. Kevin and Will took me around the last couple days to visit a couple of these biomass hub sites. I'm going to go with Chris to see the one in Northern Ireland before I head back home. That is an amazing setup, right? I'm here to tell you that is world-class. It is laid out and thought out extremely well, and you've got an incredible amount of material in there that you're looking at. And you've got these scales, right? You've got really small, tiny plots, 5,000 plots. So Will, the field crew that does the measurements on the 5,000 plots in some of these trials is like, ooh, hats off to you, because that is no small undertaking. All the way up to, reasonably sized demonstrations that somebody can look at and envision what it would look at on their farm. So these are really powerful sites. When I look at them, nothing like it in the United States, particularly this distribution across 8 regions. So you know, I've asked questions the last few days, so what's the plan after March or the end of this program? But I would really encourage you all to think about how you figure out a way to carry those on, because the investment has been sizable, right? And the value will be huge, right? In order to build an industry. If you need to go back in 5 years and start over again, it's a huge investment, right? And a lost opportunity, and it just slows down progress. So when we look at commercializing things, right, it's like you folks here would look at them, right? It's greenhouse gas emissions, which is a big driver, and of course costs. And if you look up across these systems, then you identify these sorts of opportunities, right? Yield, we just heard about this again, you'll hear about it again, yield is key. This harvesting systems is key. I had a chance to go and visit Jamie Whitby, another very innovative project you have going on here. That is not an incremental change in planting and harvesting system, that's a step change, right? The dramatic opportunities for cost savings and increased precision from those kind of systems that he and the team they were developing is just, to me, is like, wow, it's amazing. He was over a year and a half ago to the States with Kevin and a few other people, and he showed diagrams, and I thought, yeah, really? That's like really nice CAD diagrams, right? And then I saw it in the shop the other day, and I thought, that is amazing, right, that it's come this far this quickly. So just a couple of other quick comments. I'm at time here. All along that supply chain, a common thing, and that's people, right? So it's great to hear the work that's going on here, because it's people all along the supply chain. We work on the technology and the biology. We spend a lot of time and effort on this, and I've said this for now a couple of decades of my career. We do not spend enough time on the sociology and the behavior of the people, right? And that's not my field, right? But people make all the connections in the chain. And we need to spend a little more time trying to understand that and how to connect the people effectively, as well as the technology and the biology along the chain. So it's great to see that happening here as well. Finally, just a comment on collaboration, right? So there was a question about that at the end. I'm not in the market, right? I'm a university person, so I look at these things a little differently. But the way I look at it is we can accelerate the process here in the UK, in the US, other parts in the world by collaborating, right? By sharing ideas, sharing information and techniques where we can. At some point it moves to the business realm and there's competition, and the comment was great. If there is enough of a market that there is competition, then hats off, right? We've had success. But the collaboration early on is really important, right? So here's a good example. I put in a proposal to the Department of Energy that's pending back in June, and Kevin and I have known each other for a while. When he was over in May, he talked about this EnviroCrops program that he's put together, and I thought, oh, isn't that cool? This proposal came up, and I thought, oh, I should call Kevin, because the work has been done to build the base of that, and how hard would it be to change the numbers in the spreadsheets to US values and US systems? Okay, so we live in acres and things, funny units like that over there, right? But we can do that. We don't need to spend $1 million building that from scratch again, right? So Kevin said, yeah, let's go, let's try and do this, right? So it's those kind of things that happen, right? That breeding material gets shared, right? People talk about that and ideas. So that collaboration, I think, is key, and we need to maintain open lines of communication and partnership where we can, right, to try and advance these systems. So I will stop there. I probably went a little over, but there were a few other comments I wanted to make from what I heard this morning. Thank you very much for the opportunity to come and share with you. I'll be around the next day and a half, and I'm glad to chat and answer questions. So thank you very much.